You are listening to the Critical Mass Radio Show, Orange County's business talk show, focused on exploring topics of interest to CEOs who are leading middle market companies. With your host, Richard Franzi.
Hello and welcome to Orange County's longest running business talk show and podcast. To prove that, this is our 1600th episode, and I can think of no one better to have on the show for our 1600th show than Angelo Ponzi. Angelo, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate being on. You probably don't remember this, even though I've appeared several times. I was actually on the 800th show. So here I am, 800 later.
I do remember that. And we were looking through the archives, and you are our most frequent guest. This is going to be your 6th appearance. A couple you had other people with you, but overall you've been on the show here 6 times, which is far more than we've had anyone else that I can think of over the years on the show. So I'm excited to have you back here on the program. There's certain symmetry to it, 800, 1600. So I guess that means our 2400 show, we'll have to have Angelo back for that as well. So let's start by talking a couple things I want to get done with you today. One, we're going to talk about you as a fractional CMO and the services that you offer. And then we're going to do a deeper dive into your new book, which I'm excited to talk about, The Strategy Blueprint. But before we get there, tell us a little bit about the kind of work that you're doing for companies here in Orange County and other places as well from a marketing perspective.
Yeah, thank you. So when someone hears the word marketing, they immediately go to tactical stuff. So we're going to push that aside. Where I focus is on the strategy side, hence the Strategy Blueprint. I have a market research background, so I use that background to help gather facts and information to help companies better understand the market dynamics. What's the market that they're competing in or looking at? What's going on with their customers, their prospects, their competition? How are they positioned in the market? What's their messaging? What's competitive messaging? What's relevant to the customers? What's going to motivate them to change companies or change products or whatever those factors are? And then I help layer that up into messaging and positioning based on fact, not me just sitting in a boardroom with the client. And then I also work on revenue growth plans. So where do you want to be in 3 years, 5 years? Do you want to sell your business, whatever you want to do, and then work backwards from there based on this information and lay a strategy to accomplish that. I'm kind of holistic in the way I approach things. So it's not just about marketing, probably maybe even a better title is the Chief Strategy Officer, because I tend to get into process and all sorts of aspects of the organization. Yes, in the plans, there are tactical things that need to be done, whether it's marketing or sales or whatever it happens to be. And at that point in time, I tend to oversee it and either work with internal teams or external teams or put teams together to make sure that the plan is executed properly, stays on plan, on budget, on strategy. And unfortunately, I learned earlier on, I'm in my 11th year now, that when you just hand the plan over to somebody else to just run it, it gets off track. And so I started putting that kind of oversight as part of my package.
So I work with a range of Orange County-based companies, but the concentration is with SMBs, lower middle market kind of companies. And I know that you have directly engaged with a number of them. And I think I've always found you unique in your data-driven approach, which in many SMB companies, it's not data that's driving their decisions. It's emotion or it's bias. And so I love the fact that you're able to slow people down and ask them questions that make them realize they really maybe don't have a full understanding of who their market is and who their customers are. And I appreciate your willingness to do that. What I have seen sometimes is it's frustrating though, because many times entrepreneurs just want to take action to do something. And you have to slow them down before they spend their money, don't you, to make sure they're making the right decisions.
Yeah, it is hard, right? Because you're exactly right. It's we need to put a program out tomorrow. We need our social media, whatever it happens to be, convince them that it's not in their best interest without really understanding what's going on out there. And a lot of times I'll hear, oh, we know our customers, we have everything that, but at the end of the day, I've proven over and over and over again that they might have some of it down, but they don't have all of it. And it's what they don't have that really causes the problem. I mean, a case in point, I was brought in about 60 days ago to a company wanted to improve their website. So I had the CEO, I mean, it's a $40 million company. And I just said, look, if you just want somebody to fix your website, I'm not your guy. And of course, he was intrigued that I was basically saying I don't want to do work with him. And so I said, so here's my process. Here's how I work. And I showed him this kind of grid that I have of how I approach. At the end of the day, he said, I want that. You're right. If I just give you input, it's no better than what we're doing now. It's all from our own introspective of what needs to be done. The reality is. And so we've spent time, we analyzed their competition. We've talked to their customers. We did a deep dive internally because we find a lot of times that the senior management, while they all nod their heads in a boardroom, they don't all think the same, right? So I need to understand where the disconnects are. And they've been very happy. We just presented all the messaging and positioning. And now the website people are starting to put it together. Why? Because we have a completely different picture in the way we're approaching it that is more relevant to support sales.
It's one of the common refrains that I hear from entrepreneurs and business owners is, how do I quantify the investment that I'm making in marketing? What's the ROI for the money that I'm spending? And as they relate it to sales, sometimes it's easier because they feel like, well, scoreboard, I can see the sales, So how do you help entrepreneurs and business owners to understand how to look for the ROI on the strategic marketing and the work that they do, not just with you, but in that category of marketing?
Yeah. So I when I put a program together, one of the things I do up front is get them all to agree on what the KPIs are going to be. How are we going to measure it? Because, if we're doing the consumer and we're running ads, let's say, and we're looking at ROAS and cost of acquisition, and you can figure that stuff out. But when you go on the B2B side, it becomes much more different because they might see a blog or they might see a LinkedIn post, and then they go online and they go in and register, and then they come back 3 weeks later because they got a newsletter. So how do you quantify that? And so it's kind of hard. When I look at analytics, I can go in and look at what was the source, what brought them there. But what I don't know is how many times they actually came back, right? And so by laying some foundational work to say, this is what marketing can do, we're top of funnel. I think people forget that, right? Marketing is top of funnel, sales is bottom of funnel. My job is to build the awareness, get them in, understand, get them interested, and then the handoff, right? We're going to make a lateral move, and sales are going to take it down the field. And so by measuring that, we can look at, did it drive enough people to the website? Did it create enough leads? What happened in that funnel? And then we can start making analysis and judgments. There's a lot of ROI that you can put against like a trade show, for example, but the reality is it's pretty hard to quantify right away. Sometimes that might take months to determine. I do personally, I do a newsletter once or twice a month. And I got a call from a guy last week who's been on my newsletter list for 2 years. And he goes, I got a lead for you. How do I quantify that? Right. It's out of nowhere he comes. But so it's people looking for the quick wins and the quick hits, especially when the process takes a long time. Some of these clients, they might have an opportunity, but it might take 6 months or 7 months to get spec'd in and find the approval. Then it might take 2 years before the product's actually built. So how do you quantify, judge that? So I really work hard to try to get them to lay that foundation up front, so there's no guesswork at the back. And actually, this client I'm talking about, that was one of their prerequisites. How are we going to measure this? How are we going to measure if the work you just did has an impact on our website? I said, these are the things I can do. These are the things we can measure, things we can monitor and make adjustments to. Can I guarantee that it's going to, get you that $1 million order tomorrow? Yeah, I can't. I just can't.
Yeah, if they're that desperate for results, there's probably a bigger problem too than just having a solid marketing strategy. So let's pivot and let's look at your book and start. Okay, I love to ask authors, how did you come up with the title? So let's start there. The strategy blueprint. When did that come about? Was that the title that you had before you started writing the book, or did it evolve over the course of writing the book? And what does it mean? How did you come up with the title, and what does it mean?
Sure. So first of all, the title was towards the end. Mm-hmm. It was originally called whatever it was called. I think I just titled it in my computer as a handbook, because I saw it more as a functional tool as opposed to a big narrative book. And where it ended up being the strategy blueprint is what we do. It's kind of the premise of the organization that, the organization is called Craft. And if you were to read our website, it talks about building and structuring and understanding the nuances, right? I've likened it before to a house or an office. If I was going to build a house, you and I wouldn't grab some nails and some wood and go out and start pounding away. No, we've got a blueprint that's going to give us direction. So that's kind of been the foundation of our warble, if you will, since we started this. And so that's kind of how it morphed into what are we doing? We're looking at building a blueprint for somebody to follow. And then because we focus on strategy, that's kind of how I got put together. But it was not the name of the book. I would say it probably became that name within the last 30 days before publishing.
I love the name, and you're right. It's congruent with your approach to strategic marketing. So let's just walk through the various sections and maybe think about the big idea, the takeaway, what a reader might gain from, and a listener too, because you have it in various formats. We're talking about it here today. So the first part of the book, after we get through the foreword, is titled The Strategic Marketing Framework. So what's inside that section in those chapters of that book?
Yeah, so that's probably the longest chapter in the book. And it's the first one because, again, it's foundational for some of the conversations that happen in other chapters. And so when I put this together, it's like, okay, what's the process I go through? What's important? So we talk about the role of market research. We talk about competitive analysis. We talk about customer segmentation. So a lot of those strategic points that are found throughout the book, this chapter, which again is the longest, becomes that really, if you read that sets the foundation, hopefully, if you want to read more. And so I just broke it down to all the different pieces that we touch on as we go through. And then it's written to the point, it's, again, I don't want to call it a handbook, but it's a process. It tells you what to do. It says, if you want to do customer segmentation, here's how you go about it. If you want to do building personas, here's how you go about it. Here's some of the pieces you should be looking at. So I tried to structure the book that somebody literally could just follow it and put together a strategic marketing plan. The second part of this is the role of a fractional CMO, because that's what I do. And not that it pushes me, but it's the idea that it gets beyond, a marketing manager or even a director of marketing. I've worked with, no offense to the director of marketing, but a lot of cases they're more tactical in nature and not strategic. And so I try to put the role in there as you can have yourself a senior level person, and this is what we do. It's not just about me, but what that role does and how it can help play with all these different pieces. And then the other key part is about storytelling. Ultimately, we're telling a story. And so by having those building blocks of how do you tell that story and what's important, because you're gathering all this information, you're synthesizing it, and coming up a way to tell that story that's relevant to your customers. Also looking at motivations and how do you change behaviors. I use a process called laddering, where we'll look at the functional benefits of a product or an attribute within the product and we layer it up, we ladder it up to the emotional connection. So how do we do that? Is there emotional connection, or is it just a feature that does nothing, right? So you're always looking at how do you tell that story to make the buyer, if you will, comfortable or happy that they made that decision. That old saying, you won't get fired for buying IBM. That dates us a little bit, but that was true, right? You could make that decision, and so again, how do you make that emotional connection? And so that's really that kind of foundational and the framework within that first section.
I love our conversations and how you talk to the clients in the Ref Orange County community. One of the aspects that I've always thought they undervalue in SMBs and lower middle market companies, even middle market companies, is the value of their brand. In consumer space, the brand has a lot of equity, but in the middle market, it doesn't seem to get the right amount of appreciation from the leaders of the company. And so I like that your second section talks about brand and brand development. So from your position as a strategic marketing expert, what role does brand play in a company's success?
Well, it's extremely important because ultimately, no matter what product or service you create, it should be under a corporate brand umbrella, if you will. So again, there's lots of different brand architectures, and if you decide not to do it that way, right, whether you're doing like an Apple or you're doing it like a P&G, there's different ways to structure that product service attributes. But if you look at things that are underneath it, the brand becomes extremely important because your services can come and go, people can come and go, but ultimately, what's the strength of that brand? I mean, I've even productized a lot of the stuff I'm talking about. We've productized, and it's under the corporate craft umbrella, but there are specific products that we have that I can move in and out, and it's still hopefully carrying the attributes of what the brand, my brand, stands for. And so I look at that with a corporation, and I also look at when things get confusing. Like working with a company, they have an industrial division, which is what I'm working with, but they also have a consumer division, and they both have the same name, except the URLs are slightly different. And I heard it, and they even tell me, yeah, we get people that are confused. They go to our consumer division when they're looking for industrial products, and we don't make it easier for them to get back, or and so that just creates confusion in the market about what the brand really stands for. And whether it's a brand, your brand promise, or whatever those kind of attributes of your brand are really important. A lot of people think your brand is your logo, and that's certainly not it. There's personality, it's positioning. There's so many different pieces that make up the brand and identity, the logo, if you will, colors. That's just a piece of it. And so for me, nurturing and protecting that brand is utmost important. I remember years ago, I was talking to a law firm, and I was talking about their brand, and he basically says, I don't really care about brand. And I said, why? He says, well, I just bring on a lawyer and they bring clients, and when they leave. And I said, but when they leave, are they hurting your brand? And he just didn't get it. And so I wrote an article about, I don't need no stinking branding, but they just didn't get the fact that they just looked at it as individuals. And so, a lot of the work that we do is looking for consistency in message, because that's about the brand, right? You and I walk out the door, and you and I working for the same company, telling different stories, that hurts the brand. And so getting people in alignment and getting them to understand, how do you tell that story succinctly? I just went through this. I'd give an assessment internally, and one of those questions are, if you had an elevator ride, how would you describe your business to somebody else in 30 seconds? I just finished one. 18 people took it, and I got 18 different answers. And this is leadership and sales teams. And, so already I know I've got some issues that I have to deal with. And so to your audience, that what your brand stands for is extremely important. And I have a whole, again, chapter on it. I think there's 3 chapters: brand messaging, brand building questions, and business ideation, all driven under the branding.
Yeah. And then we get to the third section of your book, which again, I I was impressed with how it differentiated you in my mind from any other person who was in the marketing profession that I had met up to that point, which is data-driven insights and decisions. And so I know that you have a long career in this, and you have expertise on how to actually conduct data analysis and data acquisition that isn't biased and garbage and actually valuable insights. So I'm glad to see that you put it in the book. But can you kind of give a quick overview of what's in that section for our audience?
Sure. Well, it talks about, throughout the book, how to gather research and how to use research, right? And a lot of companies go, we don't have time for research, it's too expensive, blah, blah, blah. But again, it gets back to you're just talking to yourself. And so how do we understand what that information is? So looking at the data and the story that it tells. And again, for myself, I'm fortunate that not only am I kind of a classic researcher in a sense, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, or predictive modeling, those kinds of things. As a CMO, I know how to read and use that stuff. Where a lot of people, when I've dealt with just researchers, they go, my brother's a researcher, and he basically hands me the data, and it's like, okay, what's your interpretation? He goes, that's not my job, that's your job, right? So by being able to cross that over and understand how to utilize that information and what it means, it has been extremely powerful in the sense that getting that data, whether it's understanding how your customers feel about you. I just finished a project where it was a enterprise software program in the supply chain market. They wanted to introduce a kind of a new version in the middle market. And they said, well, we don't know what features we should have. And they gave me a list of like 15, 16 features. I was like, oh, that's way too many, number one. And so we went out and we interviewed 400 potential users of this product. So we did a quantitative study so we can do statistical projections. And we used some various techniques, and we were able to narrow it down to the top 5 features that would, you could probably just do 4, but the top 5 that the market in general would look at. But not only the market in general, we were able to cross it by 7 different vertical markets. So we were able to layer those 5 that were pretty much going to fit across, so you didn't have to customize it for each market, right? So, and then that drove the messaging and everything else. And so, but we wouldn't have got that if we were just sitting around talking to each other.
No, and I could see that company trying to put marketing dollars against all those various messages and the likelihood of them getting any traction or awareness versus a handful, 4 or 5, and being consistent about spending their marketing dollars on a few messages and maybe getting more of an impact because of it.
No, absolutely. And we were able to not only look at product features, but we did messaging as well. And while we found consistency in what was important, we found that, A, B, C was important in consumer products, but C, D, and F was more important in manufacturing. And so we could actually now look at our story, so our consistency of our brand, but we knew what features to highlight in those particular vertical markets or those solutions, whatever it happened to be. So again, all that came from 6 weeks of market research and doing a quantitative study. But on the flip side, a qualitative study, you talk to 10, 15 of your customers or the market, and that's going to provide a lot of insight. And I think the important thing there, and I pointed out, is whoever starts it should finish it, or wherever you divvy it up. You shouldn't be having all sorts of different people do all sorts of different interviews because you're already putting bias into it.
Sure.
Because the way I interview is different from the way you interview, and so there's just a lot of insights in the book about how to approach that from an importance standpoint, and more importantly, how to use it.
So hopefully that was your phone ringing, people wanting to talk to you about.
Yeah, they're like ringing right off the hook.
Yeah, it's good. That was a critical mass speech. That's why Orange County's Electronic Business Talk Show and Podcast. So there is a strong component of tactics in how you work with your clients, but it comes after the strategy is set. Because you talked a lot about tactics that most people gravitate to. Oh, what are we going to say in the marketplace? Who are we going to have? They want to get to what are we going to do? But I love the fact that you do it in an informed way. Now, the final part of your book, marketing budgets and ethical practices. What an interesting approach. So I've got to ask you to kind of take that part of those chapters apart a little bit for our audience.
Sure. Well, what's interesting is when it comes to, we get asked all the time about budgeting. So in the chapter, there's, marketing budget playbook, it's called. And, there's basic structure on how to do budgeting, whether it's looking at industry standards or percentage of those kinds of things. But beyond the basics is really digging in and looking at which of your products or services are profitable, which ones are driving revenue and profitable, which ones might be driving some profit but not a lot of revenue, which ones are, might have been your original product that you still love and can't seem to get rid of, that's doing absolutely nothing for you. And so really getting under the hood and understanding where the revenue comes from, and then allocating budgets against those products that are really doing well, and also what industries are they coming from. A lot of times there's a matrix in the book that looks at, where do you sit current products and current markets. Well, if you want to expand into new markets, can you do it with your current products, or do you have to create new products? That starts to create a whole different situation of product development and those kinds of things. So when we're asked, hey, what's our adjacent market? One of the things we look at is, where can I take what you already have and just leverage it into something new, so you're not investing a lot. Of course, the worst is new markets, new products, which again, it's like starting a new company. And so the book really gets into that as far as helping to have a clear understanding of what's driving your revenue and your profitability, and then working budgets according to that to reach the markets that you need to.
So you do touch on and talk about artificial intelligence and marketing. Can you give us a little sense for what readers will learn from that area of your book?
Yeah, I think that part of it is when on this chapter, and AI is changing so fast that I could probably just put another whole book together on it, and by then it would probably be outdated. With deep fakes and all the stuff that's going on, I mean, the basic chapter is about being conscientious about how you're using AI in your marketing messages, and whether you're deceiving people and doing those kinds of things, because it's easy now. We see it in lots of different realms as the way people are doing it. I mean, you're seeing, actors that are, hawking products, and it's not even them, right? So the whole story there about being ethical is this technology is evolving. We as stewards of it have to be conscientious about how we use it, and keep in mind that our own ethics about our businesses, because ethics, brand reputation, right, all that kind of weaves together. You are doing something that's not is not deemed ethical, can have an impact on your brand. It takes a while. It takes time to build a solid brand. It takes seconds to destroy it. And so that's kind of where that was going. As I think we've talked before, I've been dabbling in AI now for about 6 months. Actually been working with the group, coming out with a product. We have a proof of concept in the e-commerce space. But it's taken a lot of time to understand all the tools and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's something that we all need to be very conscious about. And then the last part of that is, here's an action plan based on everything that you've been told, and I kind of laid it out. Hopefully it scares everybody. They want to call me to do it for them.
Well, I was going to compliment you, but you kind of, it says a lot about you that you are willing to lay bare the intellectual framework that you use, and then some of the tools that you use to help your clients. That you come from an abundance mindset, not a scarcity mindset, because you're not keeping your secrets behind a paywall and making people. I'm really encouraged that you are confident enough in the value that you add to the process that you're willing to share the process so freely in your latest book.
Yeah, well, thank you. Again, us people really know me. I've worked with companies that have no money, in a startup situation, but I've been fortunate to work with global organizations that have, multi-millions of dollars. I've worked in consumer products. I've worked in technology, B2B, industrial products, the apparel business, restaurants, alcohol, beverage. I mean, so I've worked in a lot of different places that throughout my career, I've got to see how people approach and do business. And I tell you, across the board, the ones that are, I'll call them more sophisticated, that have some money, where they go is we have to do research. We have to understand the consumers. And some of the consumer product stuff, they can't, when they create a television commercial, they can't actually go to market with it until they hit norms. And so tons of research. Matter of fact, my last corporate job was in that realm, that we were working on a product for Dove, for Unilever, Dove hair care. And the client had tested their commercial something like 10 times before they got the company I work for involved. Because they were just spending a lot of money. They couldn't do anything with it. And so but where I'm going with this is, in all those cases, it was like, we have to start with research first, which just continues to reinforce since day one, that research is important, and having outside perspective as opposed to us sitting around talking about it, because we have our personal feelings the way things should be. But the reality is, it's the people that buy our services or our products that are telling us what's important.
I have secondhand experience, in other words, observational experience of how personal people feel the work that they've done on their website or their logo or their marketing message is, and how careful you have to be to convince them that maybe it wasn't the best work. You know what I mean? It's an emotional factor for clients of mine, SMBs and middle market companies. It's it takes a bit of a emotional intelligence to tell them, hey, your baby isn't as cute maybe or smart as you think she is or he is.
Yeah. I working on this manufacturing company, and in my first early meetings with the CEO, he said, I created the tagline. Well, through our research, his tagline is, because I literally asked the customers, do you understand this tagline? And most of them did not. And so I happened to mention it in a meeting. I didn't bring any taglines. And I said, I didn't want to touch the tagline. I know it's sacred. And he surprised me. He goes, no, if you got a better one, let me know. Shocked me. I've heard, don't touch these things before, and you kind of live with it. But yeah, so, I mean, you just never know with who the customer is and what's going on, and the time. I mean, as we know, I'm just starting to work with someone within the ref community, but we had our first conversation was like 2.5 years ago. And, here we are today, and we're finally going to do something, because you just don't know.
If someone would like to buy the book, how do they do that? And then if they want to connect with you, how do they do that online?
Okay. Well, to buy the book is on Amazon. It's is a printed book, or it's a EPUB or Kindle book. So you can go look it up, the strategy blueprint on Amazon or under my name. I also have a link from my website as well, which is craftmarketingandbranding.com. And then the easiest way to connect with me is on LinkedIn, and then you have access to pretty much everything.
Well, I said at the top of the show, we had a good one planned, and our 1600th episode, I was strong, and I'm really glad we brought you back after all this time to be a repeat guest, and look forward to having you back on the show. Thank you for your time today and your insight into your latest venture, your newest book. How exciting.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity, and always good to be on the show and to see you.
Thank you. And to the audience, thank you for being a part of Orange County's longest running business talk show and podcast. See how easy that is to say, ladies and gentlemen? It should just roll off the tongue. If you happen to be an Orange County entrepreneur, maybe you're an author, you've written a book as well, and you would like to share your story with our audience like Angelo just did, it's really easy. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm Rick, R-I-C, Franzi, F-R-A-N-Z-I. Let me know you have an interest to be a guest. Between Haley, our producer, and myself, we'll be happy to get you ready and then feature you on a future episode of our show. I can't guarantee it's going to be as momentous as the 1600th episode, but we're interviewing a couple people a week here on the program. Would love to have you on the show. Till next time we all have a chance to be together, I hope all of your business decisions move your companies in a positive direction.